Onyinye adjusted the wrapper tied loosely around her chest as she stood by her store arranging smoked fish in neat rows. She looked up just in time to see her youngest daughter, Amarachi, laughing with a young man who carried a bag of rice on his head. The boy's shirt had seen better days, and his shoes were barely holding together. Onyinye frowned her face immediately. "Amarachi!" she barked, slapping her hands on her hips. Her voice rang out loud enough to make a group of passerbys glance her way. The boy hurried off immediately, avoiding her gaze. Amarachi lowered her head and shuffled towards her mother, her laughter gone. "What have I told you about talking to men with nothing in their pockets? You want to disgrace me?" Onyinye hissed, dragging her daughter by the arm into the store. Amarachi winced but said nothing. Onyinye's voice softened, but her eyes remained cold. "Do you want to end up like me? Is that what you want?" Many years ago, Onyinye had been just like Amarachi, young, full of love, and blind to what the world really was. She had married her husband Azubike despite her family's warnings. "Love is sweet," she told them, laughing as she followed him into a tiny room where they slept on a mat. Together, they built a business empire. She sold palm oil in large barrels while he negotiated deals. It was not easy, but Onyinye never complained. When she was pregnant with her second daughter, she would back her firstborn, Adora, while pounding yam for customers in her roadside buka. Her hands were always sore and her feet ached, but she was happy because Azubike was always there. Onyimo, don't worry, one day we'll eat like kings. I'll treat you like the queen you are." And then the wealth came. It didn't happen overnight, but when it did, Azubike transformed. The man who once kissed her palms and said, "You are my queen," now looked at her as if she was death under his feet. "Onyinye, you are too local for my new friends," he said one evening, his words cutting through like a knife. She had just returned from the market, sweat dripping down her face, carrying bags of provision for their growing household. "Local?" she repeated, dropping the bags on the floor. "Azubike, is it me you are calling local? The same me who tied wrapper to sell food in the rain so you could buy your first car?" Azubike didn't reply. Instead, he adjusted his agbada, picked up his phone and walked out. The signs were there, but Onyinye refused to see them. He started staying out late, coming home only to change clothes. Then one day, he didn't come back at all. She heard from neighbors that he had just built a mansion in another part of the city and had married a beautiful, educated woman called Ego. Ego was everything Onyinye wasn't: polished, well-dressed, and fluent in English. The betrayal broke Onyinye, but she refused to cry in front of her daughters. "If I crumble, who will raise these girls?" she told herself, tying her wrapper tighter and facing each day with new determination. She sold everything she could lay her hands on: pap, groundnuts, okra, even kerosene in bottles. Her hands grew rough and her back bent under the weight of her struggles. But her daughters never went to bed hungry. Then, one evening, word came that Chief Azubike had fallen mysteriously ill. Onyinye heard it from a woman who came to buy garri from her store. "They say he couldn't walk or talk," the woman whispered, her eyes darting around as if the news was a secret. Onyinye's heart beat faster, but she said nothing. Weeks later, another piece of news followed. Azubike was dead. Before Onyinye could process the information, she learned that Ego had vanished. She had sold Azubuike's properties, emptied his bank accounts, and disappeared into thin air. Onyinye sat on the edge of her wooden bed that night, staring at the wall. Her youngest, Amarachi, slept beside her, her tiny hand clutching her mother's wrapper. So, after all the suffering, I'm left with nothing, Onyinye whispered, tears streaming down her face. But even as her tears fell, she resolved to keep fighting. Her daughters grew up to become beautiful, educated women. Adora became a teacher, Chizoba a lawyer, and Amarachi a nurse. Onyinye had poured all her strength into them, determined that they would never depend on a man or marry a poor man with hope to build together. But now, watching Amarachi smile at a poor boy with no future, she felt her chest tighten. What kind of curse is this? She muttered to herself as she watched the boy disappear into the crowd. Little did Onyinye know that this was just the beginning of another chapter in her life. One that would test everything she believed about love, trust, and the power of a mother's influence. The first suitor came on a Sunday evening. Onyinye had just returned from evening mass, her scarf slightly falling, her wrapper tied tightly on her waist. She was tired, but the sight of Adora's nervous smile as she ushered the young man into their small parlor made her forget her tiredness. "Good evening, ma," the man said, bowing slightly. He had an awkward, shy smile and carried a small bag of fruit in his hands. Onyinye's sharp eyes scanned him from head to toe. His shirt, though neatly ironed, had a missing button. His shoes were scuffed, and the wristwatch on his arm looked like something from the Aboki store she passed every day. "And who are you?" Onyinye asked, not bothering to return his greeting. She folded her arm, her chin lifted like a general inspecting her troops. "My name is Obinama," the man began, his voice steady despite her glare. "I'm here to do what?" Onyinye cut him off. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You want to marry my daughter, Abi?" "Yes, ma," Obinna said, smiling nervously. "Obinna," Onyinye said, sitting back in her chair. "What do you do for a living?" I'm an apprentice mechanic, ma," he stammered. "Apprentice mechanic?" Onyinye repeated, her voice rising. She slapped her thighs and laughed humorously. So you want my daughter to be using her salary to buy tools for you, Abi? You want her to eat grease and fuel for breakfast while you are there tightening bolts? Before Obinna could finish, Onyinye was already on her feet. She reached for the small basin of water by the door. "Let me help you wash away this nonsense idea from your head," she said, pouring the water on him. Obinna jumped back, the bag of fruit slipping from his hand. "Get out of my house!" Onyinye shouted, grabbing a broom and brandishing it at him. "Before I sweep you out like poverty you want to bring into my family." Adora stood frozen, her face pale. "Mama, stop it," she pleaded, stepping between her and Obinna. "You are defending him," Onyinye snapped, pointing the broom at her daughter. "This is how you want to repay me for all my suffering. After everything I went through, you want to marry someone who doesn't even own a bicycle." Obinna hurried out, his head bowed, while Onyinye muttered curses under her breath. Adora ran into her room, slamming the door behind her. The pattern continued. Men came, and Onyinye sent them away. A teacher, a small-scale farmer, a barber, all left with Onyinye's insult ringing in their ears. Some she drenched with water, others she chased with her broom. When a shoemaker came for Chizoba, Onyinye didn't even let him sit down. She stood in the doorway, blocking his path. "Shoemaker!" she exclaimed, clapping her hands in disbelief. "So when it rains, my daughter will be eating akara while you sew wet slippers. God forbid bad thing." Mama, you're too harsh, Chizoba said later that night. I'm harsh because I don't want you to suffer, Onye replied, her voice trembling with emotion. Do you know what it is like to give everything to a man and be thrown away like trash? I won't let that happen to you girls. Never. But Onyinye's determination to protect her daughters soon turned into obsession. When a wealthy businessman named Uchenna began courting Adora, Onye wasted no time pushing her daughter towards him. Do you know how many girls are praying for a man like this? Onye said one evening as she sat with Adora in their tiny kitchen. Uchenna has money, respect and connections. He will take care of you. But Mama, Adora said, he's always busy. He barely has time for me. Busy doing what? Making money, Abi? Do you want a poor man who will be at home all day with nothing to offer? Think about your future, Adora. Don't be stubborn. Onye's words were like a weight on Adora's heart. She eventually agreed to marry Uchenna, hoping that time would bring love and companionship. But life with Uchenna was not what she had imagined. Most days, Adora sat alone in the large house he had built. Her only companion was the housekeeper and the occasional hum of the generator. When she called him, his response were brief. I am in a meeting, he would say. We'll talk later. Letter never came. One night, Adora came to her mother's house, her eyes red from crying. Mama, I'm lonely, she said, her voice breaking. Lonely? How? Onye asked, looking up from the corn she was peeling. Uchenna doesn't have time for me, Adora said. I feel like a stranger in my own home. Onye sighed, setting the corn aside. She reached for her daughter's hand. My dear, she said softly, marriage isn't always sweet. Sometimes you have to endure. But Mama, is this what you wanted for me? Adora cried. Onye's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't find the words. Adora's tears reminded her of nights she had cried alone waiting for Azubike to return. Was she doing the right thing? Or was she simply transferring her own fears onto her daughters? Before Onye could answer, Amarati burst into the room, her face flushed with excitement. Mama, she exclaimed, Chibuzo is coming to see you tomorrow. Chibuzokwa? Onye asked, confused. Who is that one again? Amarati hesitated and said, he's a manager at a car wash, but Mama, he's a good man. Onye felt her anger rise like a storm. Another poor man over my dead body. The sound of Onye's slippers echoed down the polished hallway of Uchenna's office building. Her wrapper squished with every step and her hands gripped the handle of her well-worn handbag. She had made up her mind to speak to him, to make him understand that wealth alone could not sustain her daughter's happiness. At the reception desk, the young lady sitting behind the counter stopped her. Good afternoon, ma. Do you have an appointment? Appointment, Ikwa, Onye exclaimed, adjusting her headscarf. I don't need an appointment to see my son-in-law. Tell Uchenna that Mama Adora is here. The receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously at the line of executives waiting in the lobby. Onye tapped the counter impatiently, her eyes narrowing. I won't sit here like a statue, Onye said firmly. If you don't call him, I will go inside and find him myself. Moments later, Uchenna appeared, looking slightly puzzled. His navy suit was crisp, his tie perfectly knotted. Mama, is everything okay? He asked, his tone polite but guarded. Onye folded her arms. Let's talk, she said simply. In his office, Onye took a seat across from his large mahogany desk. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Uchenna, I came because of my daughter, she began, her voice steady. Adora is suffering in silence, and it is because of you. Uchenna blinked, taken aback. Suffering? Mama, I provide everything she could possibly need. Except your presence, Onye interrupted. A woman doesn't just need money, Uchenna. She needs her husband's time, his attention, his care. Do you think marriage is only about putting food on the table? It is about sacrifice, compromise, and showing her she matters. Uchenna frowned, leaning back in his chair. Mama, my business requires... Your business won't collapse if you leave the office early once in a while, Onye said sharply. Listen to me, Uchenna. I was married to a man who thought money could replace love. Do you know where that left me? Alone and raising 3 daughters by myself. I don't want my adorer to live the same way. Uchenna's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the desk. Finally, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I'll try, Mama, he said quietly. Don't just try, Onye replied, her voice softening. Do better. That evening, Adora sat in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She barely noticed when the door opened and Uchenna stepped in. Darling, his voice called, startling her. She turned, surprised to see him home so early. In his hands was a bouquet of fresh roses and a shopping bag from her favorite boutique. For you, he said, his lips curving into a smile. Babe, what's this? Adora asked, smiling. An apology, he said, stepping closer, and a promise to do better. Tears welled in her eyes as she took the flowers, their sweet fragrance filling the room. Get dressed, he said, we're going out. That night, they dined under a canopy of stars at a rooftop restaurant. Over candlelight, Uchenna held her hand, his eyes filled with sincerity. I have been a terrible husband, he admitted, but I promise, Adora, I'll be the man you deserve. You are my partner, and I won't take you for granted anymore. Adora smiled, her heart brimming with hope. For the first time in months, she felt seen. When Uchenna's company announced its end of the year party, he insisted that Adora and her family attend. Onye and her daughters arrived at the venue dressed in their finest. Onye swelled with pride as she saw her daughters turn heads with their grace and beauty. The grand hall was alive with laughter and music, the scent of expensive perfumes mingling with the aroma of delicacies. Onye watched as Uchenna introduced Adora to his colleagues, his hands firmly around her waist. Chizoba, however, seemed to catch the most attention. Her emerald green dress shimmered under the light, and her laughter carried like a melody. It wasn't long before a young man approached her, his smile charming and confident. Good evening, he said. I am Ifeanyi, a member of the board. May I have this dance? Chizoba blushed, hesitating only a moment before nodding. As the evening progressed, Onye noticed the two of them talking in a corner, their face lit with joy. Ifeanyi leaned in to whisper something and Chizoba threw her head back in laughter. They looked like two friends who had known each other forever. Adora nudged her mother gently. Mama, see how happy she looks. Onye smiled faintly, a mix of pride and worried in her eyes. We'll see, she muttered, her thoughts already racing. Months passed and Ifeanyi became a regular visitor at Onye's home. His charm and humility quickly won the family over, though Onye still kept a watchful eye. One Sunday afternoon, as the family sat under the mango tree in the compound, Ifeanyi arrived with a confident smile and a small wrapped box in his hand. Good afternoon, Mama, he greeted, bowing slightly. Good afternoon, everyone. Onye's sharp eyes darted to the box in his hands. Ifeanyi, what's that you're holding? Are you selling something to us today? Chizoba laughed nervously. Mama, behave. Ifeanyi knelt before Onyinye, his tone soft but firm. Mama, I have come to ask for your blessing. I love Chizoba and I want to marry her. She is everything I've prayed for. Strong, intelligent and kind. Please give us your permission to begin this journey. Onye's lips pressed into a thin line as silence fell over the group. Finally, she spoke. Love is not enough, Ifeanyi, she said. A husband must have the heart to care, not just the means to provide. Can you promise me that you will treat my daughter like a queen, even on days when love feels hard? Ifeanyi met her gaze steadily. I promise, Mama, with every breath I have. Chizoba's eyes filled with tears and Onyinye sighed deeply. Stand up, Ifeanyi. I will not stop love where it has chosen to grow. May God bless you both. Chizoba and Ifeanyi's wedding was a grand affair, filled with laughter, music, and dancing. Onyinye watched her daughter walk down the aisle, tears streaming down her face. As she joined Ifeanyi at the altar, they exchanged vows that spoke of commitment, sacrifice, and love. Adora squeezed her mother's hand. She's so happy, Mama. You made this possible. Onyinye smiled faintly. I only guided her, my child. Happiness is hers to protect now. A few months later, Adora had news of her own. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, she placed a tiny pair of baby shoes on the table. Uchenna stared at them for a moment before realization dawned. Wait, are you saying? Adora grinned, nodding. Yes, we are having a baby. Cheers erupted around the table, and Onyinye's heart swelled with pride. She pulled Adora into a tight hug. You see, my Ada, God's blessing don't delay, she whispered, her voice filled with emotions. Months turned into years, and the family thrived. Chizoba and Ifeanyi built a home filled with love and laughter, and Ifeanyi treated her like royalty. Adora and Uchenna welcomed a healthy baby boy, and Uchenna, true to his word, balanced his work and family life. Onyinye often sat on her veranda watching her daughters and their families visit on weekends. She saw their joy, their unity, and their success. Her heart was full. One evening, Chizoba sat beside her mother. Mama, she began, how did you manage to raise us so strong even with all the challenges you faced? Onyinye smiled. Life taught me that pain can either break you or shape you. I chose to let it shape me. I made mistakes, yes, but I learned. Never let bitterness dictate your choices. Build with love, trust in God, and never stop fighting for what you believe in. Chizoba nodded as she hugged her mother. Thank you so much for watching my story to the end. So, I would love to hear from you. What do you think about Onyinye's actions towards her daughter's suitors? Has there been something that happened to you in life that shaped the way you react to things? Share your thoughts in the comment section with me. Talking about life and lessons. If you are to find out that the people you loved the most were secretly mocking your pain, what would you do? Find out in this story next.